Good morning. Welcome to All People's Church, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Julia Sexton, and I am the co-celebrant this morning with leading the worship with our guest, the Reverend Mark Christian. Our Sunday service is a shared time of worship for all present, as we gather for music, spoken words, and a time of reflection and inspiration as a religious community. Let us come together in a spirit of compassion and respect for ourselves and others attending this service. We especially welcome those who are visiting today. If you haven't already done so, please take a minute to stop by the visitors table near the front door, where you can be placed on our mailing list to receive our weekly emails and monthly newsletter. Before we continue on with worship, here are some announcements. The first is that Monday, April 17th, here in the sanctuary at 7:30, Spectrum Chamber Music Ensemble will play here. And if you'd like to contribute food towards a reception afterward, you're invited to. Or if you'd rather contribute money for help in that area, you can see David Bindi, who's sitting in the back there. I'd like to take a few minutes, or just a minute, to invite everybody to join the conversations that we're having regarding writing a new vision statement. We have a good mission statement, one that tells who we are and what we do, but we're seeking to craft a statement of our highest goals and aspirations, something that we can look to help keep us on a righteous path for the next 15 to 20 years. You can join in one or more of these conversations on Sunday, April 30th, or on one of the third Sundays in the summer, so June 18th, July 16th, or August 20th, and all of these meetings will be in Jagger's Parlor at 9:45. But if you're late, go ahead and come in. Your participation is coveted. And as a final announcement, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, the Reverend Mark Christian. Mark is a third-generation Unitarian Universalist, now living and working in Stillwater, Oklahoma. He has served UU congregations in Las Cruces, New Mexico, as well as Oklahoma City, where he was born and raised and went to church as a youth. I first met Mark years ago when we both served on the district board and on the staff of the district leadership school. He's also been active at our Southwest Summer Institute, known as SWOOSY, when it was held at Lake Texoma. Prior to Mark's work in ministry, he spent 20 years working in radio. Because of Mark's vision impairment, we're staging the service today from the floor for movement, and so he can engage more directly with you. Welcome to All People's Church, Mark. We're happy to have you here again. And now, please settle comfortably. And now please settle comfortably for our musical prelude.
This day is a gift of love, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. Come, let us worship together, for this is the day we have been given. To love in, to live in, and in time to die in. Let us rejoice in our capacity to think, to feel, to hear, and to understand. And let us rejoice in the promise and the possibility of this day.
In body or spirit for the lighting of the chalice, our opening hymn, and our spoken affirmation.
The last time I was here in February, I sang this chalice lighting for you. Some of you may remember it. If not, I'll tell you the words are, let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another. And so if you pick up on the melody as we go along, please join me. Let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another.
Thank you. And now, join in our opening hymn, number 269, Lo, the Day of Days is Here. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. You may be seated. This is the time for the young and young at heart to come forward for the story for all ages, today read by our Director of Religious Exploration, Sarah Burrell-Harrop.
So today, it's actually not going to be exactly a story, but more like a conversation. So this is Easter, and one of the central figures is Easter is a guy named Jesus. So do you ever wonder, what did Jesus look like? Any ideas? So I have some different pictures of Jesus, and I'm not going to show them on the slide yet exactly. I want y'all to look through them, and you can pick one or two that seems interesting to you. And the slide that is being shown is from a book called Silence by Shizuku Endo, who's a Japanese Catholic. And he wrote a book about Portuguese missionaries who had gone to Japan. And one of the protagonists of the book thinks a lot about what does Jesus look like. And so this quote is from the book. What did the face of Christ look like? This point, the Bible passes over in silence. Jesus is never described in the Bible. Not what he looks like. What he does is described, but not what he looks like. So did either of y'all find one that looked good to you? Or we can just kind of talk through them with the folks. So y'all each found one. Okay, so we'll go to the first slide. So this slide, and I'm going to go ahead and describe it, is a person with straight-ish kind of black hair, blue eyes, a brown face and body, and a kind of like high cheekbones and a really red lips. And this is one that Addie liked. Addie, do you want to explain what kind of you liked about it? What's that? Okay, so Addie says it just caught her eye. And this is from, it's kind of cool that you picked this one, because this one's pretty modern. It's from 2021 by a Korean artist. Or at least, I don't know the artist, but the name is Korean. And so it makes me wonder, is this kind of a woke thing? To make Jesus look like this? Sort of different than the blue-eyed, blonde, white Jesus that a lot of people know. And so I was looking, let's see. And so we'll go through a few more slides, and Charles actually picked a slide, one that we don't have a slide, but I'll describe to you. So this one, which is the one that's being shown, is from the Philippines. And it's the Black Nazarene. And this is in a tradition that's very popular in South and Central America and also the Philippines. And can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I feel like I'm missing one. Anyway, they have big processions in the Philippines and it's a very oldish tradition, although the pictures are from 2019. And the one that's being displayed right now is a Japanese mother and son. So they're displaying this one right here. So it's a statue, and it's got the child is wearing Japanese clothes and has a Japanese hat. And this is from in San Francisco. And there's a big Japanese community in San Francisco. So this was from a Catholic church in San Francisco that was kind of ministering to their community by depicting Jesus and his mother in the way that they could see themselves. So the next slide. So this one, again, my question was whether that's a woke thing. I'm having a hard time finding this one to show y'all. So this one is a picture of Jesus and the rich man, that parable. And Jesus is wearing sort of the toga type robe, but everyone around him is wearing Chinese gowns, and they have kind of Chinese features. This is from the 1800s. So the next slide. So this picture is from Poland, and it is a black Madonna and child in Poland from the 1600s. And it's believed in the church that this is in that there was a miracle around this mosaic that saved the church. So the next one, please. So this one is also pretty old, from the 1600s. It's the one that's behind y'all here. And it's from Persia. Again, Madonna and child, but wearing finery, Indian, Persian finery from the 1600s. So it's not new to depict Jesus in a culturally relevant fashion. So the next slide, please. Okay, so this was a very interesting part of my researches. This particular mosaic is from Greece, and it's, I don't remember which, I don't know how old it is, but it's pretty old. And as you can see, this is a vision of Ezekiel, so it's Jesus. Well, how wide is his hips? Those hips could give birth, which leads to the picture that Charlie picked, which I did not find a Creative Commons license for it, so it's not in the slideshow. But I'll leave the pictures, all the pictures at the back, so you can look at them. So the picture, Charlie, do you want to describe the picture or say what appealed to you about it?
It's a statue with no hands, and it's a
You can say just how wide it is interesting to you. Okay, so it's a statue where he has no hands, but he has tiny breasts. And this is from 300 in the Common Era. And so there was, during that time, the 4th and the 5th century, it was pretty common to depict an androgynous Jesus. So my objective and point in taking our time for all ages in this way is to remind you that Jesus is not described in the Bible. And it is not woke or CRT or whatever buzzword it is to depict Jesus in a way that's meaningful for the community that is participating in worship. So thank you for participating. I appreciate it. Thank you both for coming up. And if you don't mind to take the pillows back to the back.
And we'll sing the kids to their next activity with hymn 414 as we leave this friendly place. Each week, we share the undesignated cash offerings in the collection plate with a charitable organization here in the community. Our Share the Plate recipient this quarter is the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, the statewide network in Austin whose mission is to educate and advocate effectively for public policies that reflect our UU values. They have been busy doing good work these past few weeks while the legislature is in session. This religious community exists by its mission as a fire exists by burning. But a fire cannot burn without fuel, and it is the time, the energy, the imagination, the vision, the creativity, the compassion, the love, and the financial support of the members and friends of this community that fuels our mission to nurture and sustain a welcoming, inclusive, and diverse liberal religious community that transforms lives and serves the world. Your support, the free and generous support of each and every member and friend of this community, is what fuels this community and its mission, and without your support, it's the flame of justice, community, and love cannot burn brightly to warm us and be a beacon in a world threatened by division and fear. The offering will now be received. Will the ushers please come forward?
I've asked Julia to actually read the readings, since because of my visual disability, reading is an impossibility for me. It comes from John Shelby Spong, who was the Bishop of New Jersey. And while he was Bishop of New Jersey, I think they ordained the first woman to the Episcopal ministry as well as the first gay person. But he's more significant in terms of thought to me. I encountered his book, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, in those years before I went to seminary. And it was truly profound in getting me to understand a broader understanding of Jesus. And this is an excerpt that isn't come from that book, but it's a lecture that's very similar to pieces in Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, where he talks about the nature of Jesus and the fact that it isn't necessarily what people portray it to be.
There is no question in my mind that had there not been some transforming experience that happened to the disciples after the death of Jesus that convinced them that he had conquered the boundary of human death, there would be no Christianity. But what people don't understand is that the idea that that experience meant the resurrection of a body that could walk physically out of a tomb on the third day after crucifixion is a very late developing tradition. You will not find it in Paul. You will not find it in Mark. Most people are surprised to know that in the first gospel, Mark, written in the early 70s, that nowhere does the risen Christ ever appear in Mark to anybody. It is only in the late Gospels that he not only appears, but offers his flesh to be inspected and eats and walks and talks and interprets Scripture. It is a very late development in the tradition. There is a powerful Easter experience that starts the whole Christian faith, transforms the disciples, changes them from cowards who had forsaken him and fled, and brought them back into being heroic followers of this Jesus. Changed the way they understood God so that whatever that Easter experience was, they could never again think of God without seeing Jesus as part of that definition. They could never again see Jesus without feeling that God was part of that definition. Something incredibly powerful happened, but it had nothing to do with the resurrection of the body. Now I'll ask you to stand as you are willing and able and join us in singing hymn number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New. At this time in our service, we pause to honor and to give time and attention to those things most important to us. We gather here for healing and for peace in our hearts, and to honor our time together with the shared stories and news from the congregation. Each week there is a journal outside the sanctuary where you can write down joys and sorrows you would like to share. Today there is nothing in our book. But we want to honor those who are not with us, those who are struggling, and let us open our minds and hearts to welcome in the love and faith and hope for the world around us. We are also invited at any time during this worship service to step forward and light a candle in our meditation area. And now, please settle comfortably for a musical interlude.
I requested that we have that hymn, O Life That Maketh All Things New, sung, because it is to me a quintessential Easter hymn. It's not one you'll find listed in the index under Easter, but it's that notion of a sense of life that knows no death, the life that maketh all things new, that I pull out of Easter. I also have us do that because it's my favorite hymn. Okay. I grew up in the Oklahoma City church, and starting in the 1940s, the choir processed every Sunday morning with that up until about 1972. Every Sunday, we were in the little church. As kids, I was in the junior choir, and that's what we did in junior choir too. So the words to that one are deep, deep, deep inside me. So I share that as something that I think is quintessential to Easter, but also of significant import to me. And then I want to say, I can't believe I'm going to preach about wokeness. I do not like that term. I don't like it at all. The first times I ran into it probably was maybe close to 10 years ago. It was used in a, if not caustic, slightly pejorative term by African Americans who had seen white people who suddenly felt like they wanted to be in solidarity with them, and they started calling them woke. Now, I don't know if anybody else's knowledge of the origins of that term are the same, but that's where I ran into it. And it was not done as a, isn't it a great thing that you're woke? It's like, oh, here you are, woke again, And so I can't believe that, I don't like that term, but I'm going to preach about it because it pairs well with the common among Christians greeting at Easter. The greeting is, and if you drive around streets in Fort Worth or Arlington or wherever you live, it's probably like in Oklahoma City where I come from. A lot of people will have in their yards a little paper sign out there that says, "He is risen." He is risen. That's the classic Christian greeting for the day. He is risen. And the response is, He is indeed. And the interesting thing about that, if you look to what John Spong told us, is that nobody was sure beyond that. There was a sense of risenness, but what that meant was kind of left for the individual, certainly in the earliest strands of the tradition. Later it became that he physically was risen, and that there was a body to touch and to see and to greet, and He walks with me and He talks with me and all of those other things. But that wasn't in the tradition early on. The tradition early on is that something happened. And I did a lot of study in seminary on Jesus. On Jesus, how many syllables can you get into the word Jesus? But there's actually no extant proof that Jesus ever lived. They're in the Bible, but that's using the Bible to prove the existence of Jesus is what's called a tautological error. You can't use something to prove itself. And there is no other evidence. There's relatings by late in the first century and into the second century of the Christian movement, but not of Jesus. So you can't prove it, but obviously something happened. You don't have to be at a pond and seeing the ripples going out to know that something went in, even if you didn't see it. You can tell something went in. And that's where I am with that, with Jesus. And that's the same thing I think that John Spong talks about. He said that something happened, that this group of disciples who had been raised as Jews from the birth and in generational knowledge to believe that God is one. The Shema, Adonai Israel, Adonai Eloheinu Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. But now suddenly, they could not imagine God without imagining Jesus. And they could not look at the work of Jesus without imagining God. And that's a miracle. But something happened to keep them together after a devastation, if the stories in the Bible are true. And there's no evidence that there was a Jesus. There's no evidence that He was crucified, although that was a common form of terror done by the Romans. It wasn't uncommon as the Jews were coming into Jerusalem at Passover, which the Bible tells us happened, for them to pick a few out of the crowd and just crucify them as an act of terror and saying, if you step out of line, this is what happens to you. But somehow if this one whom they loved and knew like they knew few others was taken from them, was crucified, given a horrid death. One of the things that happens these days is among Christians is they kind of forget the terror of crucifixion, forget the horror of that, forget the shame of being crucified. The Bibles and the stories in the Bible are undoubtedly not true when they talk about Jesus being taken down on the day of His crucifixion. Because first of all, the Romans were experts at crucifixion, and they wanted to make the death last. And the death usually lasted maybe up to a week until they basically drown in their own bodily fluids creating in their lungs. It didn't happen in a day. And they certainly didn't give people, one person, permission to be taken down, wrapped in cloth, and put into a tomb. Those are all creations of the tradition. But something, and I agree with John Shelby Spong here, must have happened. We don't know what it is. So what does that mean for us today? Something happened. There is a life that maketh all things new. The truth is, there are people here with us today who are on the edge of a personal crucifixion or are perhaps being crucified now. Perhaps you found out that your son or daughter has a drug problem. Perhaps you've got a child who's become pregnant with little opportunity to do anything now. Perhaps you have a spouse who's told you that they want to end their relationship. Perhaps you have an illness. You've gotten a cancer diagnosis. And part of you dies. And part of you dies. But when we look at that story of the crucifixion and the resurrection, whatever it is, it's the idea that despite death, something can come out of it. I want to tell you about a couple of events from my life that reinforce for me this idea of that kind of a resurrection and that kind of being risen, being woke. As was alluded to earlier by me and earlier in the service, I grew up a Unitarian Universalist. Well, I was born a Unitarian. The Universalist part came a couple of 3 years later. But anyway, I grew up in this tradition. I grew up around the ethics of Unitarian Universalism, political, social, sexual. I was in 1972, a precursor that led to the all About Your Sexuality curriculum, which was the predecessor to Our Whole Lives. So I'd been through that as a teenager. And yet, I found myself in my 20s recognizing that I had a level of homophobia in me. That I preferred not to acknowledge that there were gay people. I knew from my sexuality, I knew that existed. And I'm certain there were people in my church who were gay, and I just didn't think about it. But it wasn't until in my 20s when I was working at a radio station and the morning team were both gay that I began to encounter my real feelings, because I had a lot of frustration. And I don't want to get into why I had that frustration other than to say it was quite real. And the same thing was true around race. I was raised a Unitarian. I was raised believing in the unity of all people. I was raised in believing in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. But the experience of my life, particularly when I was in high school, and forced integration and busing had come to my school system, had led to a very clear separation of whites and blacks. And I got to where I recognized that I didn't know black people, but on top of that, I didn't trust them. And when I realized that, along with my old Sunday school learning, I was caught in a real bind. But this recognizing it is kind of becoming woke. I became woke to these two examples. Other examples in my life I'm sure I could find. But these two I want to lift up. Was around my response to LGBT issues and also to race. If you had asked me in those days, do I hate black people? No. Do I feel like I'm prejudiced against them? No. Do I want anything to do with them? No. And when I recognized this, it put me into what they might call cognitive dissonance, spiritual dissonance. And the same thing with LGBT issues. But my point I want to get to, the question about woke or risen, is it's not enough for me to recognize that I had racial prejudice. It isn't enough for me to recognize that I had sexual prejudice. I've got to do something. And this is where I want to extend that metaphor of woke to risen. Something happened with Jesus. They're not sure what, but something happened. And these people could no longer live their lives without experiencing anew, with experiencing God in Him and Him in God. And the metaphor I want to take is basically our biology. What does it mean to be woke? Most all of us probably went to bed last night. Hopefully we slept, maybe slept well. And all of us this morning, or whenever we got up, woke. But it wasn't enough to wake up and lay in bed. I'm woke, I'm awake. But that isn't what we do. We then have to rise. Rise and shine, my mother used to say. It's not enough to be woke, we have to rise. He is risen. He is indeed. We are risen. We are indeed. It isn't enough for me to recognize the fact that I had racial prejudice. I had to start doing something about it. And we all do different things in our lives. One of the ways, I had a conversation with a guy who told me I would never understand what it is to be black because I could never understand what it is for people to make those decisions about you before they ever met you. Now, in my own twisted way, what I decided I was going to do, because I was a child of the 70s, is I was going to let my hair grow really long and kind of wear workers' clothing, despite the fact that I had a college degree. So that way people would make an assumption about me without knowing it. And I talk to people and they get in conversation, well, you don't look like you'd know all those things. Well, anyway. And it wasn't enough for me to recognize that I wanted to see gay, lesbian people as invisible. I had to learn to embrace their presence and their existence. I remember when I was going through the program that you use of welcoming congregation. They said it's not enough to tolerate gay lesbians. It's not enough to welcome them. You have to move to where you treasure them. You treasure the insights they bring. You treasure them because of their differences, not in spite of their differences. It is important to be able to stand with them and stand alongside them, but whether it's racial or whether it's sexual or whether it's economic, socioeconomic. I ran into a post on Facebook the other day that I think said it really well. It said, if you claim you're an ally but aren't being hit by the stones, perhaps you need to stand a little closer. And that's what it is to go from woke to risen. So the message I want to give you on this day, on this Easter, is that in the same way something happened for the disciples that morning when they encountered that death, that something happened and transformed them and they found a new way to be. And if we are going through our own personal crucifixions, we have to find a way to see things anew, to bring them up, to become the better version of ourselves. And that's my hope this day. And in the words of the song, the sense of life that knows no death, life that maketh all things new, woke or risen or still slumbering. Amen.
Please stand as you are willing and able and join us in our closing hymn, number 276, O Young and Fearless Prophet, verses 1, 3, and 4 only. Today's words for extinguishing the chalice come from Maddie Sifantus. We extinguish this flame, but we keep the light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it into the world outside these walls where we live until we are together again.
And for our benediction, there are blessings in the world. They are spread out like Easter eggs before us. And it is not enough to find the treasure, to find the blessing, but to be called to share it with those you encounter, known and newly known to you. Be blessed, share the blessing. Amen.
Please stay and join us.